TIL. The outcomes paradox. In schizophrenia, patients treated for schizophrenia in some developing countries have better outcomes than patients treated for schizophrenia in developed nations. This happens in almost every global clinical trial and most that I'm aware of conditions with new drugs. The reason being that developed countries have better access to better medications and thus have an improved standard of care versus developing nations, so patients in developing countries tend to do better because they still haven't even received the background level of care provided in developed nations. Active spiritualism allows people with schizophrenia to make sense of, and interact with, their world under their rules. Where do you find the highest prevalence of actively spiritual people? Underdeveloped communities. This is a massive duh to me. It's not a paradox. Direct correlation. If this isn't widely known, hit me up with some grant money. Absolutely confident. A lot of that probably comes down to cultural things, how much familial and government support there is, how disabilities and mental illness are viewed treated, whether the patient feels supported or feels like they have no options, etc. Hence why schizophrenia tends to manifest itself differently between different countries' cultures. Do developing countries even acknowledge science? If they don't have systems to keep track of these things, there will be no data. So yeah, this information is false. Edit BTW. Your title for post is garbage. You should mention India. It's not clear the news is about India. Nobody reads articles. It's only a paradox if you assume Western society is superior in all respects. We can churn out more iPhones, McNuggets, and board meetings, but that doesn't mean we have a good society. On a profound level, we can't stand the mentally ill unless that illness can be commodified or made trendy. Developed countries don't understand schizophrenia any better than developing countries. We just have more meds to throw at the problem, and oftentimes, those meds exhibit terrible side effects nobody wants to live with. And that's after hoping they work. I'm schizophrenic, but like it's a good fun and helpful thing that talks to me. Lol, it's pretty badass, and with medication it's all fun and games. I'm doing well and have a great life. Off my meds I have delusions pretty badly, but the voice is still helpful. In part, I think this has a lot to do with culture and the way voices or intrusive thoughts are viewed. If your culture has a tradition of believing your ancestors speak to you and that this is a blessing, you may think of schizophrenia differently. One of the studies I read talks about how hearing voices was viewed in the culture. If it's seen as ancestors taking to you in a positive way, then it's not as emotionally harmful. If you are just seen as crazy, then the voices are negative. I believe that environmental complexity is a massively under-recognized factor in all sorts of mental health. In more developed nations, the subconscious is tasked with processing far more data than we were evolved for. New paradox. Developing countries tend to falsify statistics data and not give a shit due to corruption, incompetence, lack of resources, making them seem more efficient at treating complex problems like schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is very scary to me because it pretty much comes out of nowhere. Is there any way to detect if you're at risk for it? What are some things that might help deduce if you're going to develop it? How is this a paradox? A paradox is when two or more outcomes contradict each other. How does the fact that people do better in one group contradict the fact that a different group doesn't do as well? Schizophrenia is thought to be a culture-bound illness. Someone in the US or UK might not only interpret, but even experience symptoms, very differently from somebody in Ghana or Vietnam. Because having a high GDP doesn't mean you treat people with mental disorders well. Unless your family is rich, the US basically just says fuck them, let them starve on the street. In some developing countries, schizophrenic delusions tend to be more positive, in the Western world they tend to be negative, that may affect outcome. Developed only refers to economics. Everything else in these places takes a huge dive, especially family life, including extended family. Not surprising, considering people get imprisoned and abandoned in developed countries. Mental illness stigma. That's cause we only know how to throw pills and injections at you. Here, eat a fuckload of lithium and Xanax. Developing countries don't indulge schizophrenia patients and tell them right away they are crazy. I wonder if they're using less medication? And more actual contact with a real human being? I guess it's an obvious question, but what are the differences in treatment then? I suspect schizophrenics in some developing nations get more family support. Some cultures may be better adapted to let schizophrenia patients heal. Also, blind people do not get schizophrenia, never been one.